It begins with silence. Not the comforting silence of night, but the suffocating hush of a room where something unspeakable has just occurred. The year is 1894, in a small town along the Ohio River. A candle flickers in the parlor of the Hartwell. Residents casting long shadows across faded wallpaper. The children are asleep upstairs. At least, that is what the neighbors are told. But if you stood outside the Hartwell house that night, you might swear you heard a scream muffled beneath the floorboards. A sound so brief, so strangled, that it could almost be mistaken for the wind. The next morning, the town preacher speaks of family unity and God's blessings. The townspeople nod, pretending not to notice the shame that clings to the Hartwells like smoke. They do not ask why the curtains remain drawn. They do not ask why the Hartwell daughter no longer attends Sunday service. Because in this town, questions are dangerous. The church owns the land, the orphanage raises the unwanted, and the families, who prosper do so by swallowing their suspicions whole. But hidden beneath hymns and scripture is a truth so grotesque, so carefully buried, that it warps every prayer into a lie. The Hartwell family carried a secret no one dared put into words, a couple bound not only by marriage vows, but by blood. And their story, once whispered in orphanage corridors, once hidden in church ledgers, was erased from history. Until now. The Hartwells were not outsiders. They were not drifters, nor were they strangers passing through. They were one of the oldest families in Belmont County, Ohio, names inked in dusty courthouse ledgers, their land granted before the Civil War, their pew reserved at the very front of St. Mark's Chapel. On the surface, their reputation was untouchable. Thomas Hartwell, the patriarch, was a man of wealth. His orchards fed the town, his money repaired the church roof, his sons enlisted when war came. Respectable, unimpeachable. A name people bowed, their heads to in prayer. But within that family tree, the branches twisted unnaturally. Children were passed between relatives with little explanation. Birth records blurred into adoption papers, marriages written down without mention of parental ties. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual, just the complexity of large families in rural America. But then came the absences. A boy vanishing from school one spring, never spoken of again. A girl buried in an unmarked grave by the orchard, the priest's eulogy strangely short. And when questions were whispered, the church answered only with one word: providence. By the late 1800s, the Hartwells were still respected. But the town had learned to stop asking why some of their children looked more like siblings than cousins, more like reflections than spouses. Because every time suspicion stirred, the church soothed it with a sermon. Every time evidence surfaced, it was hidden in ledgers locked deep in the seminary archives. The Hartwells were not simply a family, they were an institution. And institutions in America, especially in the years after the Civil War, knew how to bury what must never be spoken. By 1901, whispers about the Hartwells no longer lingered only in town squares. They had seeped into the corridors of St. Mark's Orphanage, a squat brick building where the unwanted and abandoned were kept under God's supposed watch. The orphanage was run by the same church that shielded the Hartwells. Its halls smelled of mildew and chalk, its windows streaked with rain. Children slept 6 to a room, their beds lined like coffins. Among them was a boy named Samuel, age 11. He was quiet, withdrawn, his face too pale, his resemblance to the Hartwell family impossible to ignore. He bore the same sharp jawline as Thomas Hartwell, the patriarch, and the same wide-set eyes as Margaret Hartwell, Thomas's daughter. The nuns whispered about Samuel's origins when they thought no one was listening. Some said he was taken in after Margaret fell ill. Others said no illness at all, just shame sealed behind the orphanage's iron gates. One winter night, Samuel vanished. His bed left empty, his blanket neatly folded. No sign of struggle, no broken locks. The head nun insisted he'd been relocated to another parish, but the records showed nothing. His name simply stopped. The children who remained whispered that Samuel had been taken back to the Hartwell house. Some claimed they saw him days later, in a carriage with Margaret, his small hand pressed against the frosted window as though reaching for rescue. But if he was returned, it would mean something unspeakable. The church announced Samuel had been adopted by good Christian folk. Yet the adoption papers were blank, unsigned, sealed with wax that bore only the Hartwell crest. It was the first disappearance tied directly to them, and it would not be the last. In 1912, nearly a decade, after Samuel's disappearance, a young seminarian named Elias Morton was assigned to catalog the archives of St. Mark's Seminary. The work was tedious. Dusty ledgers, endless baptismal records, yellowed marriage certificates. But late one night, in the flickering light of a kerosene lamp, Elias found a book that did not belong. It was bound in black leather without a title, its pages marked not with scripture but with columns of names of children, births, deaths, and adoptions stretching back 50 years. Many crossed out in red ink. What unsettled Elias was not the names themselves, but the patterns. Children listed as orphans who were in fact Hartwells. A daughter baptized, then re-entered years later as a niece. A boy marked as son, then later re-recorded as husband. Dates blurred together in ways that made the blood run cold. In 1878, Margaret Hartwell's baptism. In 1892, a birth attributed to unknown parents, yet bearing her initials. In 1901, Samuel's brief existence, ending with the single word, returned. Elias realized the ledger was no mere record. It was a map of concealment. The church had built an entire architecture of lies around the Hartwells, reassigning parentage, erasing connections, manufacturing new kinships to sanctify what could never be sanctified. The deeper Elias read, the more suffocating the room became. He felt as though he were trespassing into something not meant for mortal eyes, something old, corrosive, and deliberate. He locked the book back in its drawer, but he could not unsee what he had seen. By dawn, Elias Morton was gone from the seminary. He left no letter of resignation, no farewell to his peers. His bed was neatly made, his clothes folded. All that remained was his rosary, snapped in half, lying across the open ledger. By the 1920s, Belmont County looked, from the outside, like any other river town in Ohio. The orchards bloomed, the church, bells tolled on Sundays, and the trains carried coal and timber down the valley. But within its streets, silence carried more weight than truth. The Hartwells' wealth ensured that silence. Their name was etched into the foundation stone of the schoolhouse, carved above the chapel doors, printed in gold leaf on the town bank's ledgers. They were benefactors, saviors, pillars of the community. And yet, behind every polite smile and every bowed head, people knew. They knew why Margaret Hartwell never left the house after her 20th year. They knew why the children in the orchard sometimes called her mother and other times sister. But knowing was not the same as speaking. To speak was to invite ruin. Families who questioned too loudly found themselves without work, their credit revoked, their land repossessed by the very bank bearing the Hartwell name. Children who mocked the Hartwell children at school disappeared from the classroom roster, their families relocating under mysterious circumstances. So the town learned to forget. Forgetting became ritual. When a child went missing, the townsfolk said, "The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away." When Margaret's son, if he was her son, was seen walking hand in hand with her brother, people looked at the ground and muttered, "Providence." What had begun as whispers hardened into tradition, a shared blindness, a generational pact of silence. Even the cemetery bore witness. rows of unmarked stones near the edge of the orchard. Too many for a single family, too small for strangers. Belmont County became a place where memory itself was dangerous. The price of survival was complicity. And yet, beneath that surface of forgetting, something continued to grow. Something twisted, rooted in blood and secrecy, waiting for the day. It could no longer be ignored. In 1927, a traveling tradesman named Jacob Rains came to the Hartwell estate to repair the slate roof. He was not from Belmont County. He did not know the rules of silence, the unspoken pact of forgetting. On his second day of work, while replacing broken tiles above the east wing, Jacob heard something unusual, a faint tapping from beneath, the attic floorboards. At first he dismissed it as rats, but then came a sound unmistakably human, a low, shuddering sob. Curiosity overcame him. When the Hartwells left for town, Jacob slipped down into the attic. It was suffocatingly hot, the air thick with dust and the smell of mildew. At the far end, behind stacks of trunks, he found a small wooden door. Its handle was chained from the outside. From within came a whisper, fragile and childlike. "Is it Sunday yet?" Jacob froze. His stomach twisted. He unlatched the chain, just enough to peer inside. What he saw would never leave him. A boy of perhaps 9, pale as candle wax, crouched on a filthy mattress. His hair hung in greasy clumps, his wrists bore the raw marks of bindings, and yet his face was unmistakable. It bore the sharp features of the Hartwells, but not just of them. His eyes mirrored Margaret's, and her brother's. The boy squinted at the sudden light and whispered again, "Did Father send you?" Before Jacob could respond, heavy footsteps thundered up the stairs. He slammed the door shut and slipped out just as Thomas Hartwell himself entered the attic, keys jangling. The next morning, Jacob Rains was gone from Belmont County. His tools still lay by the orchard fence. His payment remained uncollected at the inn. And the boy in the attic? He was never spoken of again. By the late 1920s, the Hartwell's secret was no longer merely a family matter. It had become a covenant between blood and scripture, sanctioned beneath the vaulted ceiling of St. Mark's Chapel. The clergy had much to lose. The Hartwells funded repairs to the church roof, purchased new bells, and donated land for the parish school. Without their generosity, the church's influence would wither. And so, when confronted with whispers of unnatural unions within the Hartwell household, the clergy chose preservation over purity. Private ceremonies were held at midnight when the town slept. No public announcements, no printed bulletins. In the candlelit nave, vows were exchanged not between strangers, but between siblings. The priest, his voice trembling, recited blessings, with one eye on the cross and the other on the gold coins left at the altar. To the faithful, the sermons grew heavier, with words like obedience and silence. Questioning was equated with heresy. Dissent was painted as rebellion against God himself. Families who resisted the narrative were denied communion, their children barred from schooling. The church did not merely ignore the Hartwells' corruption, it weaponized it. The scandal became a tool of control, binding the congregation through fear. If the Hartwells could desecrate bloodlines and still receive holy blessing, then what power did ordinary families have to resist? Over time, the town came to believe that the Hartwells were chosen, set apart, their sins reframed as sacrifice, their secrecy as divine mystery. The family's very deformity became sanctified. Behind locked vestry doors, one ledger held the proof. Marriage records signed with trembling hands, ink smeared by priests who dared not refuse. But no one outside those walls ever saw them, for the church had made its bargain. The Hartwells would preserve its power. In return, the church would preserve their bloodline. In the autumn of 1931, as the Great Depression tightened its grip, a stranger appeared in Belmont County. He arrived on foot, thin from hunger, his clothes patched, and frayed. At first, he was just another drifter among many, but those who looked closely noticed something unsettlingly familiar in his face. His name, he said, was Samuel. Decades had passed since the orphan by that name had vanished from St. Mark's. Most had chosen to forget him. Yet, when he walked through the town square, older townsfolk felt a cold recognition. His jaw, his eyes, his very posture carried the undeniable stamp of the Hartwells. He found work where he could, hauling lumber, digging ditches, but his true purpose was whispered only to a few. He claimed to remember nights locked in the orphanage cellar, priests telling him he was blessed for being chosen. He remembered being taken, returned, and hidden. He remembered Margaret, the woman who had cradled him like a mother but spoke to him as a sister. And above all, he remembered the attic. At night, Samuel would drink cheap whiskey by the river and murmur to anyone who would listen, "There were more of us, more children. They're still there. The church denied him outright. A madman, they called him. The Hartwells insisted he was an impostor, a vagrant seeking attention. But his presence unsettled the town. He looked too much like them. He knew too many details." Then, one morning, Samuel was found in the orchard, his body slumped against a tree trunk, eyes staring wide at the gray sky. No wounds, no struggle, just silence. The coroner ruled it a seizure. The townsfolk buried him in an unmarked grave. But before he died, Samuel had told a handful of townspeople something they could not unhear. The Hartwells share more than their name. They share their blood. And God help us, the church keeps their secret. By 1933, the Hartwell estate had become more fortress than home. Its shutters remained drawn, its gates chained, yet the orchard fields were never empty. At night, when the town's lamps flickered out, figures could be seen moving in lines across the property, torches glowing faintly in the dark. The townsfolk called it the midnight procession. It always began with the toll of the chapel bell, though no priest was present to ring it. Men, women, and children of the Hartwell line would emerge silently, their steps slow and deliberate, their faces pale as wax in the moonlight. They carried nothing in their hands but candles. No hymns were sung, no words were spoken. From a distance, the ritual looked like mourning. But closer, for those brave or foolish enough to linger at the orchard's edge, it looked more like youth worship. At the center of the procession walked Margaret Hartwell, veiled in black though she was not yet 40. Beside her, a boy of 12, whose resemblance to both Margaret and her younger brother was unmistakable. His small hand gripped hers tightly, his eyes vacant, as though he were present in body but not in spirit. The line would circle the orchard 3 times before entering the house again, where curtains glowed faintly from within. No outsider ever saw what occurred inside. Some claimed the sound of chanting drifted across the fields. Others swore they heard weeping, children's weeping, cut off suddenly as though muffled by walls. The next morning, the town awoke to silence. The orchard stood untouched, the Hartwells unseen. But animals began to vanish from nearby farms, goats, calves, even dogs. Livestock taken in the night, their bodies never found. And though no one dared say it aloud, a question settled into every heart. Were the Hartwells merely keeping their bloodline, or feeding something older than themselves? It was the winter of 1935 when the silence finally cracked, not by accident, but by confession. Her name was Clara Raines, a seamstress who had once lived under the Hartwell roof as a servant. She was young then, only 16, taken in after her parents fell into debt. For years she washed their linens, stitched their garments, and carried trays up the narrow attic stairs. And for years she said nothing. But Clara left Belmont County in her 20s, vanishing into the anonymity of Cleveland's factories. Time should have erased her memories. Yet, in 1935, she returned, older, trembling, and carrying with her a truth that burned like acid in her chest. She went first to the sheriff, then to the preacher, and when both turned her away, she spoke in the town square. Her voice shook as she told the crowd what she had seen, that Margaret Hartwell did not live as a daughter but as a wife, that her children were also her brothers, that behind the attic door she carried food not once, but countless times, to children never acknowledged, never permitted to walk in sunlight. Her most chilling claim was not about Margaret, but about the clergy. Clara swore she saw priests at those midnight gatherings, blessing what they called the sacred bloodline. She described hands raised in prayer while the children wept, described coins changing hands, described the ledger in the vestry marked with symbols she could not read. The crowd listened, horrified, but no one defended her. The sheriff dismissed her as unstable, the preacher thundered about false witnesses, and the Hartwells themselves remained silent behind locked gates. 3 days later, Clara Raines was gone. Some claimed she fled town in shame. Others whispered she was taken to the orchard. But the ground that spring was turned fresh, and a new unmarked stone appeared at the edge of the cemetery. The woman who spoke had been silenced. In the summer of 1937, Belmont County awoke to the smell of smoke. The Hartwell orchard, those endless rows of fruit trees that had fed the town for generations, was burning. The fire began just after midnight. Witnesses claimed they saw a glow rising behind the estate, followed by the frantic ringing of the chapel bell. By the time neighbors arrived, the orchard was a wall of flame, branches snapping like bones, fruit bursting in the heat. But what unsettled them was not the fire itself. It was what they saw within the firelight. Figures moved between the trees, men in long coats, women carrying children, their faces blank and glassy. They did not scream, did not run, did not attempt to fight the blaze. Instead, they walked calmly through the inferno, as if guided by something unseen. One farmer swore he saw Margaret Hartwell standing at the center of the orchard, her black veil glowing red with embers. At her feet, a circle of children knelt in silence, their heads bowed, their hands clasped. When the flames reached them, the farmer blinked, convinced he saw them vanish rather than burn. By dawn, half the orchard was reduced to ash. And yet, miraculously, the Hartwell house stood untouched. Not a single beam blackened. The official report called it an accident. Lightning strike, dry branches, nothing more. But the townsfolk knew better. They whispered of Clara Raines, the woman who had spoken, and wondered if this was retribution for her betrayal. And when the smoke cleared, they noticed something new. Rows of small earthen mounds appeared near the orchard's edge, freshly turned. Too many for livestock. Too shallow for graves, no markers, no names, just silence. The fire should have destroyed the Hartwells' hold on the town. Instead, it deepened it. For now, people whispered not just of corruption, but of curses. After the orchard fire of 1937, the Hartwell estate grew quieter, but not empty. In the months that followed, townsfolk began noticing children in places they shouldn't be. A pale girl standing at the orchard's edge, staring with wide, unblinking eyes. 2 boys playing silently in the churchyard at dusk, their faces eerily alike. A small figure glimpsed at an attic window, watching as passers-by pretended not to see. What chilled the town was not their presence, but their absence. For when approached, the children simply vanished. No names in the school registers, no births recorded, no families to claim them. They existed only on the margins, half seen, half forgotten. At first, people assumed they were Hartwell kin, hidden as always. But something felt different. These children seemed displaced. They moved without sound, appeared in pairs or alone, and never aged. One farmer swore he saw the same boy 3 years in a row, always barefoot, always staring, always gone by dawn. Whispers grew that these were not children at all, but echoes, fragments of the Hartwell bloodline that had no place in the world. Some said they were the ones who died in the orchard fire, returned as shadows. Others believed they were born of unions too corrupted to be acknowledged, abandoned even by the family that created them. The clergy offered no answers. In fact, sermons shifted toward warnings about temptation and sin, delivered with an edge of fear. The priests avoided speaking of children altogether. But in the dead of night, when the chapel bell rang without a hand to pull its rope, neighbors swore they heard faint voices singing in the orchard, high-pitched, off-key, like a choir of children who were never meant to exist. And always, at the end of the song, silence returned. A silence that felt less like absence and more like waiting. In 1939, Dr. William Keane was called to the Hartwell estate under strict secrecy. He was a respected town physician, bound by duty, and by the quiet fear that came with serving the most powerful family in Belmont County. What he found inside the house would haunt him for the rest of his life. The patient was a boy, perhaps, 13, feverish and struggling to breathe. His skin was pale, his veins oddly prominent. But what struck Dr. Keane was not the illness. It was the boy's features. His face was a mirror of the Hartwells he had treated before. Yet his body bore signs that chilled the doctor to his core. His spine curved unnaturally, his shoulders uneven, his jaw malformed as if grown upon itself. He examined further, and the deeper he looked, the clearer the pattern became. This was not the first Hartwell child he had seen with such deformities. Some had club feet, others possessed extra fingers, fused bones, or strange patterns of birthmarks repeating across generations. They were not random defects. They were evidence of bloodlines folding in on themselves. The boy's mother, Margaret Hartwell, now older, her eyes sunken, stood by the bedside, silent. When the doctor asked about the boy's father, she gave no answer. Instead, her brother entered the room, his expression cold, and told Keane, simply, "Treat him and forget what you see." But Keane could not forget. His notes, carefully hidden in the back of his medical ledger, spoke of unnatural unions sanctioned by the church, of children, both brother and son, both niece and daughter. Weeks later, Dr. Keane vanished. His office left unlocked, his medical books scattered, his patient files burned. The only thing spared from the fire was his ledger, its final pages torn out. Some said the Hartwells silenced him. Others believed the church had intervened. But there were those who whispered that Dr. Keane had taken his own life, unable to carry the weight of what he had uncovered. The Stoics believed that greatness wasn't built on rare bursts of motivation, but on steady rituals repeated day after day. Marcus Aurelius, for example, began his mornings by reminding himself that he would encounter selfish, arrogant, and deceitful people. This wasn't pessimism. It was preparation. By expecting hardship, he trained his mind to stay calm when it arrived. In your own life, rituals act like anchors in a storm. Waking up and writing down your intentions, journaling about your fears, or spending 10 quiet minutes in meditation, all of these are modern ways to practice Stoicism. Seneca advised people to review their day each evening, asking, "What did I do well? What did I fail to do? What can I improve tomorrow?" That nightly ritual wasn't punishment, but growth, a way of sculpting the soul. Rituals build discipline without effort. Just as an athlete trains daily, a Stoic strengthens their character through repeated habits. Over time, these practices shape your mind to stay calm in anger, brave in fear, and steady in chaos. The beauty of rituals is that they don't need to be grand. Even pausing before reacting or saying no to one unnecessary temptation becomes a Stoic exercise. Your life today is the result of yesterday's rituals. Your life tomorrow will be the result of the rituals you build today. The Stoics remind us, character isn't formed in crisis, it's revealed there. The real work happens in the quiet hours, in the daily repetitions, where your mind is trained for the storms ahead. Life will test you, sometimes in ways so cruel, so unexpected, that you'll feel as though the universe has singled you out. But here's the truth the Stoics understood. Pain is not an obstacle. It is a resource. Marcus Aurelius, in the darkest days of war and loss, reminded himself, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Think about that. The very thing you're cursing right now, the betrayal, the failure, the heartbreak, that could be the raw material of your transformation. Imagine a blacksmith forging a sword. The metal must be struck again and again with fire and hammer. Each strike strengthens it, shapes it, prepares it. Without the blows, it would remain just raw metal, brittle and useless. Your struggles are the hammer. Your suffering is the fire. They are not destroying you. They are shaping you into something unbreakable. The pain you carry is proof that you are alive, that you dared to risk, that you engaged with life fully. Most people hide from challenges. They choose comfort, and in doing so, they grow weaker. But you're walking through the storm. And storms, though violent, leave behind clearer skies. So the next time you feel crushed under the weight of hardship, pause and remind yourself, "This pain is my teacher. This suffering is my strength." Do not resist it. Use it. Let it carve you into someone wiser, calmer, and stronger. Because in the end, the ones who rise are not those who lived easy lives. They are the ones who turned their deepest wounds into their greatest power. Every human being experiences pain, whether it comes through rejection, betrayal, or personal loss. The Stoics believed that pain is not meant to break us, but to shape us. They saw suffering as an invitation to rise above circumstances and create inner strength that no external event can destroy. When Marcus Aurelius lost loved ones during plagues, he did not drown in grief. Instead, he reminded himself, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Pain became his teacher. Think about it. Most of your growth has not come from easy times, but from the struggles that forced you to adapt, to push harder, to rise stronger. Pain exposes your weaknesses, but it also points the way to your greatest potential. The Stoics' way is to stop running from pain. Instead, you look it in the eyes and say, "You will not control me. I will use you." Your heartbreak becomes the fuel for self-mastery. Your failures become blueprints for future victories. Every hardship carries a hidden gift, resilience. And resilience, once earned, cannot be taken away. Pain may visit you, but it does not own you. You choose whether it becomes your prison or your power. In the end, Stoicism teaches that pain is not your enemy. It is your training ground. The stronger the storm, the stronger you become. Every single day, life presents us with choices, some small, some life-changing. The Stoics understood that while we cannot always control what happens, we always control how we respond. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." Think about that for a moment. Everything around you, success, failure, praise, insults, wealth, loss, exists outside your control. But your judgment of these things, your reaction, belongs only to you. That is where true freedom lies. Most people spend their lives reacting, letting anger, jealousy, or fear dictate their actions. They give away their power without even realizing it. But the Stoic sees each moment as a chance to reclaim control. Imagine someone insults you. You can choose to flare up in rage, or you can choose calm, recognizing that the insult says more about them than about you. The first choice gives away your peace. The second choice strengthens it. This power of choice applies to every corner of life. You can choose discipline over laziness. You can choose gratitude over complaint. You can choose courage over fear. Each choice, repeated daily, slowly reshapes your character into one of resilience and inner peace. The beauty of this truth is that you don't need to change the world, to change your life. You only need to change the way you choose to see it. And in that moment, you become unshakable, because no one can take away your ability to choose how you live, think, and feel. Regret is one of the heaviest burdens a human being can carry. It creeps in during moments of silence, whispering about missed opportunities, wrong choices, or words left unsaid. For many, regret becomes a chain, binding them to the past and stealing the possibility of joy in the present. But here lies a crucial stoic truth. The past is gone, carved in stone, untouchable. No amount of rumination can rewrite what has already unfolded. The only thing within our grasp is how we respond now, in this moment. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself not to waste energy on what has already slipped away, but to focus instead on the task at hand. Regret, he would say, is merely the mind's refusal to accept what reality has already decided. By resisting acceptance, we imprison ourselves in a battle we cannot win. Acceptance, however, brings lightness. It does not erase what happened, but it frees us to live without being crushed by it. The Stoic approach is not about suppressing regret, but about transforming it. Every mistake, every wrong turn, can serve as a lesson, a reminder to act differently when the next opportunity arises. Seneca wrote that fortune favors the prepared mind, and regret, if we let it, can prepare us. But once the lesson is absorbed, we must release the pain, or it will rot within us. Imagine standing at the edge of a river, holding stones of regret. You cannot cross while weighed down. To move forward, you must let them fall into the current, watching them sink, acknowledging their presence, but refusing to carry them further. In that release, you find a lightness, an ability to walk freely into the present and create a future unburdened by yesterday's ghosts. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "It is not death that a man should fear, but he should fear never beginning to live." This is one of the most profound reminders from Stoic philosophy, a call to stop letting fear dictate the course of our lives. Fear is what keeps us stuck. The fear of failure, the fear of rejection, the fear of judgment, even the fear of success. These fears are illusions, shadows that only have as much power as we give them. Stoicism teaches us that the only things worth fearing are the loss of virtue, the abandonment of reason, and the failure to live authentically. Everything else, pain, hardship, even death, are natural parts of life. Imagine a person who avoids pursuing their dreams because they are afraid of what people might say. Years pass, and one day they realize their life has been shaped not by their own desires, but by the opinions of others. That realization is far more terrifying than any failure could have been. To live fearlessly doesn't mean being reckless. It means recognizing that courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. The Stoics remind us that life is fleeting and uncertain, so to wait for a perfect moment is to wait for something that may never arrive. When you feel fear rising, ask yourself, what's the worst that could happen? Most often the answer is far less devastating than the fear itself. With this mindset, you free yourself from hesitation and embrace a life that is bolder, more authentic, and truly your own. Every great story carries with it a lesson, and this forgotten one is no different. As we've walked through the haunting silence of room number 404, piecing together fragments of whispers, testimonies, and shadows, one truth becomes painfully clear. The past never truly dies. It lingers, waiting for those brave enough to uncover it. Perhaps the girl was never meant to be remembered by name, but by the silence she left behind, a silence that still clings to the walls of that old building. Maybe the real horror isn't in the crime itself, but in how quickly society chooses to forget, to look away, to bury the truth under layers of time and dust. And yet, here we are, resurrecting her story. For in speaking her tragedy, we give her a voice once more, a voice that demands we ask harder questions. How many more untold stories are locked away in forgotten rooms? How many more secrets remain waiting, clawing at the edges of history, begging to be seen? Room number 404 is more than just a murder. That was never reported. It is a reminder that the world is filled with invisible victims, erased not only by violence, but by silence. And sometimes the scariest part of history isn't what we remember, it's what we've chosen to forget. Would you dare enter room number 404, knowing its walls still whisper the cries of the lost? Or would you, like so many before, turn away and let the silence win again? As we conclude this journey through the 5 Stoic habits, one truth becomes clear. These teachings are not relics of a forgotten past, but living principles designed for today's challenges. The world has changed since the days of Marcus Aurelius and Seneca, but human nature has not. We still face doubt, loss, uncertainty, and temptation. The difference lies in how we choose to respond. Stoicism is not about suppressing emotions, it's about mastering them. It is not about detaching from life, it's about engaging with it fully, with wisdom and courage. In just 30 days, applying these habits can reshape your perspective. Discipline strengthens your will. Resilience fortifies. Your spirit, emotional control gives you freedom. Purpose drives your actions, and inner peace anchors your soul. But the true power of these habits lies in consistency. Transformation doesn't happen overnight. It is the quiet result of daily choices. Each time you rise early, breathe through anger, reflect on your actions, or let go of what you cannot control. You are carving a stronger, wiser version of yourself. The Stoics remind us, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. The question is, will you simply listen or will you act? Your 30 days start now, and that's it. 5 Stoic habits that can truly transform your life in just 30 days. But remember, wisdom is useless if it stays in your head. Real change happens when you practice it daily. So here's my challenge to you. Starting today, pick just one of these habits and live it out. You'll be surprised how even the smallest shift in discipline or perspective can create a massive difference. If this video gave you something to think about, make sure you subscribe, because every week we dive deep into Stoic wisdom, practical life lessons, and timeless truths that will help you live stronger, calmer, and more focused. Drop a comment below and tell me, which Stoic habit are you starting with today? And remember, you don't control the world, but you do. Control yourself. That's where true power begins. See you in the next video.